Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and um, we're doing. I'm here for reading Carl Schmitt's Dictatorship. We're just doing this as part two, 1B, which looked at Bodin's concept of commissarial dictatorship. Part one. This is the last half of the book, the first chapter of the book. I have to apologize because the last video it ended only kind of short. I mean, and I don't know. I actually thought, and actually remember because I stopped the video at certain points because I was trying to figure out something I said about Bodin's, not Bodin, but some couple things that had the question of the text and why Bodin was not really, some the older history textbooks talk about Bodin, but then Strauss prophecy didn't. Yes, some books like Judith, there's other non-Strauss books, Straussian kind of about types who do talk about it more by Judith, the edition by the Cambridge multi-volume, but that's not no one gets the multi-volume edition of history of political thought. And in most textbooks, I haven't looked at some of the newer textbooks, history of political thought ones like this, because again, most of the ones I know, even that are do exist like this, don't really include Bodin in it. Okay, I believe so I spent like I thought I spent at least 30, 40 minutes looking, and therefore that I didn't realize how much that off camera stopping camera to find something just to verify not to be say something wrong led to things my perception that this was longer than it really was. I want the video comes under 50 minutes. Usually that'd be great, but I didn't cover much because I spent so much time on the context of Bodin. So today I'm going to try to finish the rest of it because, the first part was mostly about Bodin, which was Bodin, but then he compared Bodin to Grotius's account. Now, at this point right here, we're going to continue. The rest is going to be, it's going to hopefully get 9 pages. Part two, which deals with Hobbes. Now he shifts to Hobbes right here. On the question of temporary dissolution, let's continue, right? You're going to read text. On the question of a temporary dissolution of full power has been raised by Hobbes with a rigor that is profoundly characteristic of him. And it has been answered, it has been answered. So therefore he says that this question has been really the temporary dissolution of this. If the whole people, the populace, entrust a single person with absolute dominion, then by that act, by that act, it says a monarchy is created, right? It says if the dominion is transferred only to a certain period, then the legal character of the political power that has been created in this way depends on whether the populace, that is, all citizens acting altogether, is a constitutional subject. As a constitutional subject, in other words, it has if the power is not temporary. In other words, he says if the dominion is transferred only for a certain period, then the character of the political power that had been created in this way depends upon whether the populace, that is, all citizens, and act as a constitutional subject, which Hobbes calls a persona, and always distinguished strictly from the shapeless multitude, the multitudlo dissolutia, right? The shapeless multitude, is granted the right of assembly or not during that temporary domination. If the populace can assemble without or even against the will of the temporary ruler, then this person is not a monarch, but rather just a primus populis minister, the first servant of the people. According to the treatise De Cive, 1642, this is also true for the Roman dictator, who, in Hobbes' view, can be forced by an assembly of the people, the Comites Populi, to resign at any time before the end of his term of office, because here the people always remain sovereign. Now, footnote 51. This is famous, the element philosophy of the Cive, Amsterdam, the edition, right? First printed for Friends in 1642. Chapter, I think that's chapter or book, book 7, page 16, right? This is that. This is from De Siva in that sense. Or again, this is from, let's do this correctly, this is from the element of philosopher of De Siva, right? So this is, this is, but the impression that Hobbes, but the impression that the experience of the English Revolution and of its development into Cromwell's protectorate made on Hobbes can also be recognized in his judgment on dictatorship. In the Leviathan, 1651, he calls the dictator a title he places next to that of protector, in allusion to Cromwell, a temporary monarch, on the grounds that in this case there is a power that must be seen to be equal to that of the monarch. So in the first one, in De Siva, Schmitt says Hobbes kind of makes it clearly just that this can be overturned by the people, and he's not a sovereign, but he's not a king or a sovereign, a sovereign in this sense. He's only the first servant of the people. The people can remove him in that sense. But because of what he saw in the Civil War and because of the rise of Cromwell, he kind of changed this. That in effect, yes, yes is that, but in effect that there is what do you call a temporary monarch in that sense. On the grounds, in this case, there's a power that must be seen to be equal to that monarch. But the character of the whole but the character of a whole treatise, like the Leviathan, is political rather than devoted to constitutional law. Right? This is the problem. Right? Dictatorship. In other words, Leviathan is not really about constitutional law. It is about political rule and political structures. Um, um, Dictatorship is mentioned only in order to demonstrate that during the Civil War, even a democracy needs some monarchic institutions, and that in republics, the unavoidable dictator or protector, which most often disempowered by the assembly of the people, the coitus. Okay, this is right. This is Latin. Okay, no, sorry, Latin. Oh my God, you're going to keep on doing this. You're going to take us away from this. The group, right? The group, right? The people, the group, the body, body would be corpus, the group, rather than by the representative or various stewards of an underage king or one unable to govern, right? This is rather, in other words, it's embedded by the people. The dictator is not, or it's not a steward. It's not someone who's a representative or vicarious steward of an underage king who is unable to govern, a protector in that sense, right? That this is given by the people, right? And therefore there is this element. Therefore, Hobbes immediately and explicitly remarked that even the dictator is just a minister, servant, of the governing democracy or aristocracy, if he himself cannot appoint a successor, in which case he would be monarch, to be sure. Okay, this is Leviathan, chapter 19. Of the Latin edition, this is interesting that Schmitt relies on the Latin. Tonnis's book, Hobbes, the Man and the Work. Okay, this is why Friedrich Tonnis is such an important person, because his book on Hobbes, The Man and the Work, 1912, has rightly pointed out that compared to Hobbes's earlier work, Leviathan is a political treatise more than about natural law. The passage mentioned above has been more often interpreted as a tribute of recognition to Cromwell. However, given the line of argument presented in it, it is obvious that this view is obviously not right. So therefore, this is challenging the view that this is recognition to Cromwell, that this is a tribute to this. On Cromwell's dictatorship, sheet chapter 4, right, he says. Right? He will talk about this, his own thing. As before mentioned, Hobbes' construction hints at the problem of sovereign dictatorship. But Hobbes distinguishes between sovereignty itself and its exercise. So, sovereignty itself and the exercise of sovereignty. And thereby he evades the final consequences of his theory. Right? In other words, he hints at the problem of this. His theory of this does this problem, but because he separates between sovereignty itself and the exercise of sovereignty, this avoids it. He really realizes that in a democracy, a minister or an official is quite often assigned the kind of sovereignty in which the people have only the authority, but not its ministerium. Okay, this is Latin of this word. I'm going to check a service. In other words, but not a service. And so he is contented with the appointment of the bearers of office. This is 53. Again, this is Hobbes' Civic Book 10, right? This is why the Civic is interesting in that regard. In particular, during war, the absolute form of extreme power would always be necessary, from which, at least according to the arguments presented in Civic Chapter 10, Section Section 17, the superiority of the monarchic form of state can be deduced. Since from Hobbes, states are living with each other in a permanent natural condition, namely the condition of war. As Tonnes has correctly observed, this argument does not lead, according to its inner logic, to the traditional understanding of monarchy, but rather to Caesarism, the most rational form of enlightened absolutism. So therefore, as what Tonnes argues, that this does not lead to this kind of traditional monarchy view, but rather to Caesar's, in that sense, his idea. In the German loyalist theory of the state during the 17th century, the absolutist century, which was at heart irrational and regarded the monarch as a quasi-divine being ordained by God, and sometimes even as a creature physically different from other people. The disturbing character of Hobbes' theory has been fully registered. In other words, Hobbes' theory, this is like this. 54, Horns, okay, this is from Latin, I'll do this correctly, right? This is the political architecture part of the city, right? Furthermore, indicates that Hobbes only seemingly puts forth good arguments for monarchy. In other words, von Horn argues that he's not really monarch, seemingly good. But in truth, his teaching is seditious because it makes single individual. In other words, because it makes single individual the basis of the state. Yet Hobbes would not have accepted, say, a sentence such as can be found in Lorenz Branca's political philosophy, that for God, having reached earth, this is 1668, this is Lorenz von Strattenbach, political philosophy, right? That for God, having reached the earth, it was deemed good to choose an especially valuable and suitable matter in order to combine in it, namely in kingship, all the traits and features of his divine image, so that everything may recognize them immediately by the mark of Cain, right? Nevertheless, Spickenbach too refers to dictatorship, right? So he points out this is Spickenbach, that Hobbes would never have said this. In other words, Lawrence von Spickenbach's argument is that it's medieval in the sense that God manifesting his self-power on earth created this monarch that has certain traits and divine character. The monarchy, the human being transmogrifies, right? And everyone can distinguish them immediately by the mark of Cain, right? One is God. This is that interesting thing. Compared with Pufendorf's expression, which is heavily influenced by Hobbes, does not seem to recognize his Hobbes topicality. So compared to Pufendorf, who's influenced by him, does not seem to recognize topicality. This expression, this exposition mentions the controversy between Bodin and Rouge on the matter of whether the dictator is just a temporary governor or a monarch. Pufendorf comes to the conclusion that a dictator cannot be a sovereign monarch, like a regent or representative, who are just entrusted with someone else's power. Moreover, he, the dictator, should just be a magistrate, because he is not commissioned to govern the imperium arbitrarily, pro arbitro su. In other words, this is at his discretion, right? This is at his discretion. Govern at the discretion. Discuss things at his discretion. Govern the imperial arbitrary at his discretion. This is arbitrary here. This is put on. This is arbitrary. For the period of his appointment. The situation ought to be governed by the same legal procedures as the one implemented whenever a magistrate is commissioned with a jurisdiction endowed with the power of suspending legal means. Therefore, the situation is governed by law. Any magistrate that has that, the law governs, the law creates a magistrate that is allowed to suspend jurisdiction by legal, as jurisdiction endowed with power of suspending legal instruments or means. According to this view, dictatorship has become once more a mere commissarial execution of state functions. This is 55. This is Pufendorf on the Euro of Nature and Gentum. Euro Natural. And this is my point. Liberty Fund, please, God damn you, please, please publish, deliver on your promise to deliver Professor's thing. This is, it's not available. It should be available. They say, oh, you can buy it by you can go. Of course, you can buy these things like Forgotten Books or something like that, which you do it. But it's so big, multi-volume, and the one-volume edition is unreadable. Translation is horrible. The guy, the Danish scholar, the Danish scholar, very good guy, natural law. He was leading the thing. I emailed him back in 2012. What's going on? I've turned to other things. Like, oh, jeez. This is why this book is so important, and it's yes, it's a huge book. People should pay attention to Pufendorf here, because Pufendorf is this moment post Hobbes where we see this, and it's important for people studying law and constitutional to understand this. This is the fight, and there's a very good book about this, that talking about how the Americans, like some Americans, were governed by Pufendorf, like and Mac maybe on the question of revolution, right? Pufendorf versus Locke, right? On the right of consent and the royal consent. This is a very good book on this, published in the early 2000s or 1990s. I read the cover, I can't remember the title, but done by the Cambridge school types. So, okay, there, the controversy of this, whether dictatorship is temporary. Pufendorf comes to the conclusion that dictator cannot be, right, this, like a regent or representative who just entrusts with someone else's power. Moreover, he, the dictator, should just be a magistrate, because he is not commissioned to govern the imperium arbitrarily, as he for the period of his appointment. He is because he's not commissioned to govern the imperium arbitrarily. In other words, as he sees fit for the period of his appointment. He's done to achieve something, a goal. The situation ought to be governed by the same legal procedure as the one mentioned whenever a magistrate is commissioned with a jurisdiction endowed by the power of commission suspending legal means. In this view, dictatorship has become once more commissarial execution of stately functions, right at the note, right? After the consolidation of the monarch of the 16th century, the interest of this controversy declines, right? Well, all of a sudden, following this, once we have the consolidation of the monarchy in 16th century thing, this controversy between this question declines. Schmitt says here. Thomasum mentions it within the context of the question of temporary sovereignty and dismisses it by saying that whatever the dictator has magistrate, it is a question that can only be answered according to the circumstances of Roman history. This is 56, Thomasum's Institute of Jurisprudence of the Divine Jurisprudence. Okay, this is yeah, institutions of divine jurisprudence, right? Christian Wolff returns to the subject only to gloss it over in a few words. Now, remember, Christian Wolff is, again, post-Pufendorf, and Christian Wolff is one of the most very important before Kant, before the rise of Kant, this German thinker of Enlightenment, thinker of history of things of this. And Christian Wolff's book on right replaces it. In fact, this is available it's an edition published by Liberty Fund. People should get it. Thomas Wolff on the Us Naturale, the scientific press. This is a very important book, The Law of Nature Treated as Scientific Method, right? The eighth and last part. This is a very important book. And I think even Liberty Fund published this. Pufendorf is in a very important transition. This is the transition from Enlightenment that pre-Kant. And you can see how radical Kant is, right? You can see the post and through the Kant's influence by Rousseau. Kant, you can see Kant pre-Rousseau as being kind of following Christian Wolff. Then the influence of Rousseau, bam, and then gets him to rethink, and we have the radical break in Kant. So therefore, Christian Wolff returns the subject only as a gloss, few words. So this is what happens. It gets kind of destroys this discussion of dictatorship. In fact, the controversy was essentially about the contradiction between commissarial and sovereign dictatorship. Bodin limited himself to commissary dictatorship, for which he provided, however, an extraordinary, clear, and detailed jurisdictional foundation, extreme jurisdictional foundation. He discusses it in chapter 2 of book 3 of his Republic, the 6 books on the Republic, as his commissarial fulfillment of public duties. As a case, in other words, dictator as a case of commissarial fulfillment of public duties, acting towards a general concept in constitutional law. In other words, advancing towards a general concept of constitutional law. He employs a distinction that has already been discussed in detail in canon law and by the commentators on the doctrine of the commissarial judges. And in it, he contrasts the regular officer with the commissioner, the commissaire. Okay, so this is at 58. Note here, this is Darius, the supreme justice. The judge is active. The judge is active either as a ordinaris, or something ordinary, or as a delegated judge, on the basis of commission. And delegato, section 2, the legate acts in place of the pope, and this is again canon law, right? Also on the basis of commissio, the commission. In the chapter discussed here, Republic 3, Bodin, book 3, 2 of the 6 books of Republic, Bodin merely refers to the known commenters, Balaudus and Bartolus in particular. He hotly rejects their distinction between the ordinary and the extraordinary fulfillments of state tasks. The latter he deems to be odorous, hateful, page 380. And he criticizes Juvine, page 373, and Charles Savin, 374, 394, and Nicolas Rouge, 379, on the grounds that they fail to realize the difference between function and commission. Right? This is why that note there is important in that sense. On the commissarial doctrine, interest of this, and he says the contrary regular officers that are commissar. The regular officer is a public person who has a legally circumscribed remit. The officer is a public person invested with regular charge a regular charge limited by an edict. So therefore, this is what he says here. This is the line. Is that the officer is a public person invested with a responsibility, a regular charge, some responsibility, a charge ordinary, limited by the law, the edict that authorizes him to do it. The commissar is a public person too, but he has an extraordinary duty defined by a specific mandate. This is the quote, Le Commissioner. Again, the commissar is a public person invested with an extraordinary charge limited by a simple commission. This commission is limited function. The great point. Both have a public function, a charge public responsibility, a public charge, a minimum publimis, public office, right? This is the minimum public office. Minimus, manmus, manmus publicum, in contrast to the private person. In other words, he has a public office, Although for Bodin the commissioner is no magistrate, he is always called the latter officer. So he's not a magistrate, but an officer is the commission, the commissioner. Public 6 books through Public, Book 3, Chapter 3. It is evident that even a regular official can be by mandate a commissarial duty, and this is usually the case. But when he is no longer a regular official, to this extent, but a commissioner, page 380, right? The extraordinary judges who are mandated by the prince are simply not magistrates like the Roman quaestores parricidae, public accusers. Okay, this is, I think, Latin is. I think translation is public accusers. This is procurers of patricide, right? Accused, the people who accuse the parricida, the quaestors, those who accusers of parricide, right? Public accusers, okay, Roman public accusers, and that's people who make accusations for parricide, right? Although they have the power to command, the power to make judicial decisions, and the power of execution. So these people, the quaestors of this, right? Although they have the power to command, the power to make judicial decisions, and the power to execution, they're not. In other words, the extraordinary who are mandated by the prince are not like this. In other words, even though they have the power of command, the power to make judicial decisions, and the power of execution, but even though they have that, they're not the same as the Roman quaestor parricida. As for Bodin, Bodin explicitly argues against Jacocus, I can't ever say this, is Kuyakos, that the definition of the concept should not be limited to judicial activity. In other words, he argues that the definition should not be limited to judicial activity. Argues against. Bodin argues against that, the consciousness, and that this. According to Bodin, consciousness has neglected its most essential element, namely the puissance de commande, the power of command, and he only talks about jurisdiction. So in other words, Bodin can criticize this is that this guy Kujakos, only he can. In other words, he talks only about the jurist. In other words, he says he talks about jurisdiction and neglects the power to command. In that sense, in other words, there are generally two different ways of exercising stately powers, which can be distinguished by the different constitutional character of arrangement on the ground, of which the person is acting on behalf of the state. So therefore, there's two different ways of existing state powers, which can be distinguished by the different constitutional character arrangement on the ground of which the person is acting on behalf of the state. That person is either acting as a regular official or as a commissar. In other words, he's acting as a regular official or as a commissar, special official. And if we were to place Bodin's thought, which are interlaced with various examples into clear schema, then we obtain the he's schematizing. The official, officer, Latin officius, charge ordinatus, the ordinary charge or the ordinary jurisdiction or concern, right, of this, as one, the official, one, basis, law, edict, law express, public verification, ingredient, therefore. Two, permanent character of the office. So the basis is law, the permanent character of the office. It exists even if the bearer of the office changes frequently. For example, the annual consuls as such. it is a perpetua for life. In other words, if it is a perpetual life, it has track perpetual, tacit perpetual. This is French, not Latin. Uh, it traverses perpetually. That continues potential. It continues forever and ever. This is page 377. It can only be canceled through law. Therefore, so first this, that, and therefore that. Therefore, three. This leads to this, therefore, three. There is a kind of right to office in virtue of which the official bears his office like something like that has been lent to him for a period of time, and the owner cannot claim it back arbitrarily. So that cannot be, in other words, it's his, it's here, there's a period of time of this, and that as long as he's that time, he cannot have this power taken back arbitrarily. Four, the contents of the official duties are legally defined in terms of time, place, and time. So that the officials has this certain discretion according to his judgments. Page 388. So therefore, a law basis of law, permanent character of the office. Therefore, even if that changes, the office is perpetually continuing, and it can only be canceled through law, and therefore has an office, and that they have the responsibility that has been lent to him for a period of time, and the owner, place and time, right? And therefore, what happens, and it cannot, in other words, has given for a period of time, and it cannot be arbitrarily taken back. And four, that the contents of his duties are legally defined in terms of place and time, so the official has certain discretion according to his judgment. The commissar, so that's the officer, right? With these four characteristics. The commissar, or the commissionaire, the Latin curator, or a charge extraordinary, the extraordinary responsibility, right? Basis, ordinance. In other words, as an ordinance. What does an ordinance mean? This is from Latin, I think. This is ordinance. It's a rule. It's a decree. It's something like this. It is ordained, something ordered, in order. No permanent character of the duty. It is only selon the occasion, the occasional, and ends with the accomplishment of the business. So page 377. So therefore, this is it's ordinance, an order, something has been done for a crisis, so like this. It has no permanent basis of the duty, and it ends with the accomplishment of the duty. Three, no right to the office. The commissar holds his function only as a precarium, something uncertain granted by entreaty, right? Page 378, and is permanently dependent upon his commissioner, 378. A cancellation is possible at any time, page 376, 377. So therefore, this is this no right. In other words, it has no right to the office. It's something. The function is only precarium. He says Latin. Okay, let's look at this in the translation of precarium in the automatic. It was precarious, right? This is what precarious. Something uncertain, granted by entreaty. The translator editing is something precarious. Four, and therefore, four, again, the four and four, right? The context of the commissar's duty are strictly bound by his instructions. His discretion is strictly limited. He is always and in every detail directly dependent on the will of the commissioner, the one who's commissioned him, right? So, in other words, his discretion is strictly limited, although the latter can grant him greater freedoms, 388. The significance of Bodin's elaboration on this matter does not lie so much in the political understanding of the meaning of commissar for the new edifice of the state organization. Bodin has not realized that the commissar was a tool in the process by which princely absolutism had accommodated itself. In other words, had not realized that this was a means that princely absolutism has accommodated itself, made itself manifest, right? that it could be explained historically by the fact that royal commissions with far-reaching powers gained greater political importance only after Henry IV. C59 on this issue, G. Honorax's on the origins of two. Okay, this is the provinces. Why do I have a feeling this is going to the origins of the institutions and the intendants of provinces, right? Intendant and of Otto Heinz's the commissions. Okay, this is going to be Heinz's Weimar book 1910. Heinz, I've read Heinz's work, and we read some. I studied Heinz in college. This is German, so the commissarium and its significance in general administrative history. The ceremony for Kartagulung, this is for Karl Zurmander. Karl Zurmander. This is, I think, this is the Freischrift. This is that Freischrift volume the essay that he wrote for the Freischrift. The latter emphasizes the historical significance of Bodin's chapter. So this guy Hans Otto Heinz talks about this. And this is why Schmitt is very good as a scholar. This is Schmitt's masterpiece as a scholar, and diligent scholar, very diligent scholar in this regard. He's a pedant to a great degree. He knows all the scholarship. It's amazing in this regard. This is why, on this point, Machiavelli had a sharper and more practical view. When the last paragraph of Prince Chapter 9, he recommended to the prince who wanted to introduce an unlimited power that he should always govern by himself and never through magistrates. Because then he would always be dependent on the will of the bearers of those offices. They could easily seize power, Stato. They easily seize power. This is Stato, the state, Stato, the state, and refuse to obey. They can easily seize the state, Stato, power. That's why he does. Schmitt reads it as power. That's what the problem is. Stato in Machiavelli seems to be power, will, an act of will. That's the big thing in Machiavelli. The Stato is both will and body, and that later thinkers, Stato will become the thing itself and not the will, right? So it's the power in that sense. Characteristically, for Machiavelli's discussion, it was only vaguely suggested. He does not analyze this issue any further, nor does he talk about commissars. The opposition between the commissar and the magistrate as regular bearers of an office was only developed systematically by Bodin, who synthesized the vast material on this issue under the general idea of a theory of state, Statler, like this German Statler, a general theory of Statler. So it's Bodin. But this idea of this opposition between commissary and magistrate as a regular basis of the office is only demonstrated by Bodin. Machiavelli just hints at it. And the prince is not really a big extent. That he doesn't really cover it that much in the. He doesn't go in much detail on the Livy either. It's with Bodin that this issue is really put discussed because he's giving us a theory of state. He puts so much emphasis on the formal division of the basis of law, one side, law on the one side and command on the other. He even talks about formalities in issuing a law and a command. For instance, that the preambles are different, or that the commissar only has a yellow seal and not a green sealed letter patent. That one is inclined to think that, in terms of modern theory of state, the Statler, a formal concept had already been established that could recall the division between law in a formal sense and law in the material sense, as used in the positive theory of the state. So therefore, this is very interesting that what says Bodin, with Bodin's, and particularly Bodin's 6 books of the Commonwealth, we get a kind of Statler, state theory of state. Because why? We get a legal construction of it. He puts so much emphasis on this formal division, right? Law on one side, along one side, command on the other, and he gives this and points out the differences, right? Even the formalities of these things. That one is inclined to think that in other words, we look at this and we say, well, in terms of the modern theory of the state, a formal concept had been established that we could that could recall the division between law in a formal sense and law in a material sense, right? But this is not the case, he says. It looks this way, but it's not the case, since Bodin does not subscribe to this juridical positivism. He's not a juridical positivist. So therefore, the juridical, in other words, the 19th century and 20th century influenced by positivism will look at Jordan and say, "Oh, see, we see the distinction between these two." He's not a judicial part and is not aware of the concept of law as something separate from the idea of justice. His notion of the state is, despite its understanding of sovereignty, that of the lawful state, Riksdag, whose laws are not just expressions of power that can be issued arbitrarily and canceled arbitrarily, like any other regulations. In other words, so therefore, his argument is that his idea of the state is that it is a lawful state, a state governed by laws, whose laws are not just expressions of power that can be issued arbitrarily and canceled arbitrarily. They are dictates of norms, right? That sense, right? Despite fighting the monarchamists, right? Despite Bodin fighting the monarchomarchs, he simultaneously viewed the technologistical magnation of law undertaken by Machiavelli as something despicable. Right? This is the perception. Right? This is that even in other words, he's not going to go as far as Machiavelli. The question is, does Schmitt? Maybe Schmitt is missing the fact that to a Machiavellian, in order to survive being Machiavellian, might have to pretend he's anti-Machiavelli, right? I mean, what happens when Bodin still embraces much of Machiavelli's concepts, but he doesn't like the technique and criticizes the over concern of technique, right? And would not Machiavelli, in other words, something despicable, a ruthless and unworthy atheism from which he distanced himself. Again, is this distance done out of principle, or is this done out of fear? Is this really his thinking about this matter, or does he take this position? This is the question of esotericism, right? Persecution. In other words, he doesn't want. He knows where his butter is better, and he knows that if he says something to construction, it might not. That for him would no longer characterize a state, but a tyranny. In other words, if you had this, in other words, if all power was arbitrary, this is where if all things could be, I command something and I can arbitrarily command it. Right? Law is nothing but a command by which it is given out like an expression of my decision, and can be issued arbitrarily and command arbitrarily. That is and he says, according to him, it never be able to admit that the will of the sovereign, in other words, can turn any sentence into law. That for him would no longer characterize a state, but a tyranny. Hence, the difference between the official and the commissar cannot reside exclusively in arbitrary command. Moreover, a lawful monarchical state is a prerequisite that fundamentally respects the existing organization of offices, and therefore it constitutes a hierarchy of established offices with a predefined remit. So therefore, it exists. This is the right state, right? This is a jurisdictional state. There's certain things that I'm going to, in other words, that it cannot simply arbitrary command. The lawful monarchical state is a prerequisite that respects the existing organization of offices, and therefore it constitutes a hierarchy of established offices with a predefined jurisdiction, right? This is also the basis upon which Bodin draws his further distinctive characteristics: regular and extraordinary, permanent and temporary, right? This is why because he's regular. In other words, his further characteristics. In other words, given that this is the assumption that the characteristics are regular or extraordinary, is it permanent or is it temporary? The distinction between track perpetual, the permanent feature, and the occasion, circumstance, demonstrates this, because for Bodin, Grotius's argument according to which a duration, tempus, cannot be a continual criterion in law should have been obvious. Okay, in other words, that's obvious. Okay, for Bodin, Grotius' point that that arguments according to which duration, temporis, cannot be a conceptual criterion in law, is obvious. The contents of the commissari's duty should, according to Bodin, be different according to the concrete situation. Again, this formulation can be found in the French edition, a French Edit aux Principes of 1577, page 257, and also in the editions of 1850 and 1858, page 375. However, in the Latin translation of the word occasion is missing. See the Paris edition of 1591 and the Frankfurt edition of 1619, page 406. The Jonas edition of 1622, reference to tempus, locus, and res can be found everywhere instead. So therefore, this to tempus, time, locus, and res thing. Okay, whoa, let's go back here. No. Is that going to be extra? No, it's different. No. So I apologize. I thought it was going to be that. Okay, therefore, a dictator was nominated, Latin, if the situation demands so. So dictator is nominated if the situation demands so. One may wonder whether it is from this that Bodin draws his conclusion that the commissar, in contrast to the regular official, should have less freedom and no discretion. So that the situation demanded it, and therefore he has less freedom and less discretion. Although here Bodin is dependent, first and foremost, upon the view of the French monarchy that prevailed in his time, he nevertheless lists a number of commissarial duties which distinguish between the different types of commissars, because for him, anything the commissar is doing is based without discretion on the revocable commands of the commission. So again, remember, Schmitt is saying that Bodin is going to be dependent on the structure of French monarchy. Why? Because he wants to reform the French monarchy. He wants to give better order to it. So he's not. This is the question of what Bodin's up to. Bodin is not doing a kind of total rework. He's going to stick within the structure, but try to reframe it from within. Okay, this is the Machiavelli. This is not Machiavelli replacing this. Rather, no, this, and taking Machiavelli's concepts and seeing how this works together and fixing it so that it works together. And I think this is something similar what happens in England but you can argue that this Bodin, what Bodin does in France, this is what the Tudors and the Tudor advisors were doing with Henry VIII in England in that sense, right? And Elizabeth, and then later with Elizabeth, are trying to take the state. This is something. What's his name? Oh, come on! I know the name. It's gonna drive me crazy now. I know the name. He's right there. When I put my tongue out, I know the name. Maitland. Maitland, the great English legal historian, talking about tutorial, and even Elton to some degree. Even though Starkey kind of Elton is, I think ultimately Elton goes. I mean, this is the Starkey Elton debate about Tudor's situation. Elton asserts that the start is the end, right? He does it in a Hegelian situation. That the once you admit that once the new idea starts, the old idea has ended. This is very Hegelian kind of dialectic thinking. Starkey says no, it's not that. It's yes, it begins it, but it's the older monarch, the personal monarch, is still very much alive in Henry VIII, and that yes, that eventually comes to be what that. So therefore, that's that whole debate between Starkey and Elton, his teacher Elton. I think that's an important distinction. I think Elton is Hegelian, Elton is he approaches it in a very Hegelian fashion, and therefore he sees that the minute there is the new idea emerges is that this is a different system, and the other system is no longer relevant. Where Starkey says no, this is the beginning part, and that the older system is still that there's still kind of a give and take, and that the give and take will shape the direction that the new idea will eventually emerge. So it's not like there's an automatically okay, that's it, that's irrelevant, this is new. Rather, there is this interaction here in that sense. Schmitt, that's why I don't mention this. Oh, we're talking about this. I think this is important to understand why Schmitt is talking about Bodin here and Machiavelli in this sense. Um, um, Now, let me finish his line here, right? Therefore, dictator was nominated by this, if this is going to demand so. So one may wonder whether it is from this that Bodin draws the conclusion that the commissar, in contrast to regular, should have no less freedom of discretion. In other words, again, this is, I said that, this is, I read here, I kind of stopped here. I was saying here, why is this going on about this? This is where talked about why he's so dependent on the French model, and therefore because he's dependent on this, he's going to be looking at it within the context of it, right? Right. Therefore, distinguishes between types of commerces. Anything the commerce is doing is based without distinction on the revocable commands of his commission of the French king. It makes sense to develop Bodin's view in greater detail as he has done, in order to distinguish between the official remit of a functionary employed by the state and the contents of his official duty. So we need to distinguish between the remit of a functionary employed by the state, distinguish between the official remit and the content of his duty. That this distinction is not alien to Bodin is evident simply from his mentioning that even an official can be mandated as a commissioner with an issue. In other words, this idea with an issue. In other words, this distinction between these two things, between the official remit of a function endowed by a functionary employed by the state and the content of his duty. Right? That he's doing this, the distinction of the remit to do it and what he's doing, right? With an issue. The difference between the regular duty of an official and commission is that the former has a legally circumscribed content. So this guy, the commission, has a legally circumscribed content, and therefore, generally speaking, a restricted one, by which it is disconnected from any time and place, or from the occasion, that is from the occasion, and this is like Latin, right? The occasion, same thing. And in other words, from the particular or specific circumstances of the case at stake, the issue at stake, the case or the instance are at stake. So, in other words, this word is in particular from the occasion. In other words, by which it's disconnected from a time and place or the occasion. In other words, from the particular circumstances at the case. So, it's restricted. In other words, let's go. You teach to sign. Again, this is important to do this. The difference between regular duty of official and a commission is that the former has a legally subscribed content. The official has a legally subscribed content, and therefore generally is restricted and is not concerned about doing something which is a strictly one, by which it is disconnected from a time and a place. This is how it should be generally done. This is how things should generally not at this time in this place. In other words, the particular or special circumstances of the case. It's disconnected from this. As a result, through the regular official is bound. As a result, though the regular official is bound to the law, and the discussion and the decision he makes in each individual case is just the concretization of a decision already entailed by the law. So the regular official, when he makes a decision, he's not making a new law. What he's doing, his decision is something that the law has authorized him to do, and that the thing to do, and that his decision is the actualization of what the law has commanded. Okay? It's already entailed by the law. The way he will decide, in contrast to that, the commissioner, will depend entirely on the concrete case. So the official will decide on the concrete case. The concrete case of the situation, right, of the situation, he's commanded to do this. Okay? So he's commanded to have jurisdiction over this issue, over this aspect. So he looks at the circumstances of this issue, and he makes the decision of what should be done in that circumstance. And therefore, that command is not a law, it's rather enacting what the law has commanded him to do. In general, in that sense. And he's embodying the law in the particular, right? This is how the ordinary official does. Is already entitled in this way he decides, right? In contrast to commissioner, and the way he will decide is that he will depend on the concrete case, right? It seems that the commissar is less bound and therefore freer than the regular official, who is subscribed by the framework of a normative and legislative remit. So therefore, the commissar does not have a direct legislative remit. In other words, a normative and legislative remit, what he ought to do. In other words, he is not told what specifically to do. The reason why Bodin nevertheless portrays the official as being free and the commissar as being dependent is that awareness that an objective content is intermingled with the understanding of the official's mandate of the functionary of the state. In other words, the official is being free. Why? Because, well, his scope is broader in that sense. The thing is defined by the law. He's defined by the law, and that his freedom is determining this. Whereas the commissars, what is it? Nevertheless portrays the officials being free and the commissar being dependent. Is the awareness of the objective content is intermingled with an understanding of an official mandate of in other words, the official's mandate. He has a mandate, right? And he's the freedom to entertain it, right? Let's continue this sentence because I think we have to understand it. Since the law is the basis of the duty of a regular official, the latter is more independent from the sovereign, who cannot discharge anything in terms of the remit of a mandate without suspending the law. So in other words, he's been appointed by the regular official. In other words, since the law is the basis of the duty of the regular official, the latter is more independent from the sovereign. Okay, this is the problem. I think he means here the commissar, right? I'm not sure who's I'm a little confused by the language here. Bodin nevertheless portrays the official as really the commissar. So we're talking about the official, right? So the other must be the commissar, right? Okay, let's do the line. Let's just follow the line. This logic. He says, since and the latter is more independent from the sovereign, who cannot change anything in terms of the remit of the mandate without suspending the law. So therefore, in other words, the sovereign can't say, "Oh no, I have to change the law." In other words, the official has his authority by the law, and that the sovereign cannot simply say to this, "Oh, just do that." No, he has to suspend the law. He needs to suspend, the sovereign would have to suspend the law, remit, would have changed who cannot change anything in terms of the remit of the official of the mandate without suspending the law. Whereas the commissar, likely like a privately hired executive, remains dependent in every particular instant upon the one who commissions. So the commissar has been commissioned. He is wholly dependent on this. The commissar. So this is the difference. Official. This is Bodin's point is the official is bound by the law. He's so therefore the sovereign cannot simply arbitrarily say, "Oh no, you must do it like this," because no, he says, "Well, change the law. You must suspend the law. Then I'm supposed to do it like law." Therefore, the sovereign would have to suspend the law in Bodin for this to change. To change. To intervene this, he has to intervene it by changing the law. Whereas the commissar directly points to the commissar. The commissar's authority is directly from the sovereign. The argument he's exercising that thing. He says a privately hired executive, right, that remains dependent in every particular instant upon the one who commissions. The commissar lacks an automatic self-empowerment that lies in the legal definition of responsibility. Whereas the officer may, in other words, the office holder may not directly obtain it by law. The office holder may not directly obtain it by law, but he obtains it at least indirectly through his actual role. It's really interesting. In other words, he gets it through his role. The commissar, the office holder may not directly obtain it by the law. In other words, the commissar lacks automatic self-empowerment that lies in the legal definition of responsibility. Now, he doesn't. So therefore, the question is responsibility. Whereas the office holder does not have responsibility. The office holder may not directly obtain it by the law. In other words, his responsibility is not because of the law, but rather what? His responsibility emerges, but he obtains it at least indirectly through his role. In other words, this is where he gets responsibility by doing his job and in his role of doing his job. Not the law. His responsibility does not come through directly because of the law, but his doing of the law, right? In that sense, is not directly obtained by the law, but he obtains it at least indirectly through his actual role. From an outsider's perspective, however great the power of the commissar may be, he remains nevertheless a direct tool of the concrete and alien will of someone else. So the commissar relies on this. In other words, solve this problem, do this. One might even say that the legal restriction guarantees the official's independence. In other words, that the legal restriction, the law, grants the independence of the official in that sense. And this independence will increase if he is doing nothing but applying the law to the one concrete case. This is a very big note. In fact, according to modern understanding, the judicial office is granted a right to his function. Function means that he can only be dismissed against his will under more difficult circumstances. Okay, this is von der Schleier's. Okay, this is going to be a pain in the ass. A German word. The constitutional law, right? I forget. The second edition. The legal regulation that protects the judge from arbitrary dismissal and therefore subsequently grounds has irrevocable authority forms the basis of his right to whose function he has. This right does not rest, of course, as it did in medieval conceptions, on the private vested rights of a function holder, which was gained from tenure or through acquisition or mortgage. So, in other words, this is the medieval way. The older way, the medieval conception of something was a private, and is given as a mortgage. It was not patrimonial in this sense. The new understanding of judges is not a patrimonial right, it's of this. The private interest that the function holder had in the existing exercising his function does not count anymore when compared to the public interest of today. Therefore, it is not possible to apply without hesitation to the concept of the constitutional state, the Begriff Staatrecht, the concept of the constitutional state, right? The Staatlich Begriff, the perspective of private law, as is common in the theory of the mandate or of authorization. So private law doesn't make sense in this case. The constitutional state is all public law and this stuff. Therefore, it's to bring in private law in theory of the mandate and authorization. It's a little alien. Nevertheless, the theoretical work done in the discipline of private law is not without value for public law today. It is worth considering the rationale of a differentiation of an irrevocable authority of private law, which was suggested by von Thur as appropriate for regulations concerning public law. Again, this is from von Thur's book. Irrevocable power of attorney, the irrevocable power of attorney, Strasbourg, Fresher, and this is the Strasbourg Fresher for Laban, right? On page 2, in the discussion about the extent of irrevocable authority, von Thurn argues that an irrevocable authority is no doubt permitted to regulate the particular right of the contractor, together with the regulations that define obligations of a certain content. On the other hand, there are concerns about the irrevocable authority of unlimited scope and extent, because the same reasons would apply according to which an obligation to sell property is void. Right? This is the German Civil Code. Therefore, an unlimited procreation, procura, is always revocable. Therefore, unlimited procura is always revocable. A German commercial code. Right? Likewise, it is commonly accepted that a general authorization exceeding a determined area of legal actions is revocable. This is von Thur's Volksmacht, the people's power. I think it's the people's power, right? Yeah, power of attorney. Power of attorney. Power of attorney. This is this book on power of attorney. And see also the reference given in NN, above, and in the directions of the right courts in civil matters. This is the civil procedure book. The principles of this differentiation, which is also significant for public law, states that an empowerment or authorization in the legal sense must be by definition normatively determined. So therefore, in other words, for public law states that an empowerment or authorization in legal sense must by definition be normally determined. An unlimited authorization is not just a quantitative expansion of a limited authorization, but rather an elude. This is Latin. Sorry. My stomach is going. Something else. An elude is something else. So an unlimited authorization is not just a quantitative expression of a limited authorization, but rather it's something different. The judge has a right. A judge has a right to his function because theoretically he is bound by the law, and he is the mouthpiece of it. The judge, like a member of revolutionary tribunal, which should decide according to the concrete circumstances, or even should serve the achievement of a concrete end, would be, in this circumstance, a judge freed from law, who, on the other hand, is also an agent even more bound by orders from the power that uses him. So, therefore, this is that really odd moment there, right? Like the judge in the constitutional tribunal is a double, should decide according to the concrete circumstances, or even the sort of achievement of a concrete end, would be in the circumstance of a judge freed from law, who, on the other hand, is also an agent even more bound by orders from the power that uses him, like the people in the revolution. According to more recent opinions, the greater freedom that a judge might have does not consist in greater independence from law, but rather in the dissolution of legal norms and facts. So, therefore, in other words, judges that have greater independence from law is not, in other words, that the greater freedom judges have, right, more freedom judges have, is not about an independent, does not consist in the independence from law, but rather in the dissolution of legal norms and facts. In other words, legal laws and facts become dissolute, and norms and facts are dissolved, right? The independence of judicial function always correlates with the independence of the judge from law. That's very interesting, that the independence of judicial function always correlates with the independence of judge from the law. So they are bound above the law. This is a very interesting point about this. It's very, I think, shocking with this, right? Particularly in current debates about the question of judicial independence, right? Well, does that mean he's bound by the law? Shouldn't the judges always be bound by the law, not above the law, bound by following the law, not able to overpower over that? The idea is that they become the makers of law or reshapers of law. This is something that Schmitt is kind of, I mean, Bodin and the earlier writers would have like raised eyebrows about, and that's why Schmitt is kind of talking about this in that sense. The commissar does not the commissar does not only the commissar does not have only a conventional mandate, but simply by virtue of being a public person, he is also inevitably empowered to do business abroad, because he does not use his stately authority against the one who commissions him, to whom he cannot appeal, and insists on the right of his duties. In other words, the commissioner does not have only a conventional mandate, but simply by being a public person, he is also never empowered to do business abroad. Right? That's extra across. Not only conventional mandate, but he's that. But he does not use his stately authority against this, to whom he cannot appeal, and insists on the right of his duty. Right? That's that. He can only use his authority against the third party, be that citizens of his own state or foreigners. So the commissioner can act against either citizens of a state or his foreigner. He can't act against his sovereign or himself in that sense, right? The analogies taken from private law, which played such a significant role for Bodin and up to the 19th century, are referring not only to the mandate, but also to the authority, the representation. In other words, the authority, not only the mandate, what is being mandated, but also to the authority, the representation. This makes it evident that Bodin discusses different kinds of commissarial activity without distinguishing between them, right? In other words, there's different types of commissars. He's not going to distinguish between them. The meat inspector, the numerous commissars of police and administration, and even the commander-in-chief, the envoy, the dictator, are all are for Bodin commissars in the same way. In other words, functionally they are the same, even though what they're doing may be different. The contents of what they're doing may be different, but functionally they are the same, are in the same way, are from all in the same way. Their duty is always based on the order given by the sovereign and not on a general legal prescription. But the content of their duty, as well as their power, essentially differs from each other. So in other words, their duty and their things, but the content of their duty, as well as their power, will differ. In other words, this is that again. The meat inspector and the numerous administrative commissars fulfill their duty as long as the reason for their appointment is that they are true. The reason, as long as the reason for their appointment exists, continues, is that they are true commissars. Normally, in the course of history, they become regular officials and maintain their title simply for historic reasons. So, therefore, what happens is that things like inspectors and numerous commissars, really move from being commissars. So they continue because the problem exists. And because the problem exists permanently, it moves from being merely a commissarial thing to a official office, a typical, regular official, right? And they only maintain their older titles. It's for historic reasons. The official mandate can also be delegated. In other words, the official's mandate can also be delegated to a commissar. These kinds of commissar, who are empowered by a special authority, are best called commissars of duty. You know, whenever the content of their mandate is circumscribed by official policy. So therefore, in other words, they're given a commissar has been created to execute what has been an officer's duty, right? And this is because of specific context. In other words, empowered by a special authority. Whenever the context of their mandate is circumscribed by official policy. Therefore, there's a law. There's an official policy. Here's an official policy, and this is maybe law, right? If it is the case that there are some, if it is the case that they are to sort out one or more specific businesses, a commissar called commissar of specific businesses, right, is specifically appointed, whose authority in each individual case is dependent on the commissioner's will. The diplomatic commissar, who has to take part in negotiations, is just one example of this commissarial duty. So therefore, in diplomatic affairs. So therefore, I create I need someone to negotiate. I'm sending the commissar sends this. They send out this person with the power to negotiate, right? Who takes part in negotiations. That's one of these commissaries. Interesting. Bodin makes an exception for the envoy, who is a commissar of business, insofar he should not be called commissar of duty against the nature of his duty. So therefore, the exception is that he seems to be a commissar of duty, but he's not. He's a commissar of a certain business, which is envoying in that sense, because you don't want to go against the nature of his duties, right? Whereas his doctrine states that the commissar's discretion, freedom of action, is limited. In this case, he says that everything is different, solonzi personas, from person to person. So the commissar, in other words, that this is a case where such an envoy is different envoys, different things, different. It's not going to be. It's going to be more discretion. In other words, the commissar's discretion of action is limited. In this case, he says that everything is different from person to person. Page 388. By contrast, the dictator is a commissar afforded an authority that is substantially different from that of the commissar of a certain business or duty. Here the desire for success can become so strong that legal barriers, which might otherwise be stumbling blocks in the projected course of events, may be removed if necessary. And the dictator is the one who is the one to decide on that. So therefore, in other words, here in this case, that he's given a task to do in a crisis, and this is that legal barriers might become an obstacle to that. So therefore, he's given the power to determine if they are. He can overturn them. He can't just overturn them to overturn them. He overturns them because they're the obstacle to do what he is accomplishing what needs to be done. In other words, his job is to focus on what he needs to be done. In the interest of the desired ends, and by the means established by the dictator, dictatorship gains an authority whose essential significance consists in the right of suspending legal restrictions and of interfering with the sovereign's rights of third parties, depending on the concrete situation. So depending on the concrete situation, it can not only consist in the right of suspending legal restrictions, but also of interfering with the sovereign rights of third parties. In other words, the third parties has certain rights that they have of themselves that has been given to them. No, okay, that you can interfere with not only with the legal restrictions, but also its sovereign rights of third parties. In order to what? To accomplish the task that he was been ordered by the sovereign to do. And that, again, depending on the concrete situation. It is not the case that laws are suspended on which the rights of third party rests. So therefore, no, that the rights of third parties, they're not suspended, but rather, in other words, it is not the case that the laws are suspended on which the rights of third party rest. It is only permitted to act against the rights of third party people when the concrete situation makes it compulsory to do so if a certain act is to be accomplished. So therefore, there's a limit. I just simply doesn't nullify the rights. It rather says if I have to violate your rights to accomplish my thing. So I have to stop an enemy coming out. Someone's invading our country, invading it. There's a crisis. So I have to destroy. And the enemy, to destroy or stop the enemy, I have to first not only invade your property, maybe destroy your property, and maybe even harm your rights to do what necessary has to be done. This doesn't mean that you don't have those rights. You do, but and that those rights are not being violated by me, by the actor doing that thing. That those rights are being violated. And it's not that those rights don't exist. Is that he has granted the dictator in that situation, the entity, the commissioner, commissar, in this case, to assign to do this, is given the authority to even break the law, to not to ignore, to break or ignore the law, and he's authorized to do this because the situation demands it. Again, to make it compulsory to do so if a certain action is to be accomplished. Nor will any positive law be passed which may define in advance the authority and powers of a dictator in a concrete manner, right? Moreover, this line in German, exception depending on concrete situation. Moreover, the exception depends on the concrete situation. A concept that is completely contradictory to the logic of laws will be tolerated. Okay, not only this concept, that the exception depending on the concrete situation, this is completely contradictory to laws, the logic of law. It will be tolerated. For this commissar, I will use the description commissar of action. The dictator would be an absolute commissar of action. In circumstances and the formal theory of the new positive state collapses, right? So in the circumstances, the formal theory of the new positive state collapses. And so does Bodin's formula distinction between law and command too. The dictator, according to Bodin, is by definition a commissar whose duties, seen from a legal point of view, is essentially nothing but a commissarial duty. In this case, therefore, it is no longer up to the arbitrary will of the sovereign to issue law or command. The law, which according to Bodin forms the basis of the authority of regular officials, must in general give it at least the context of his authority. A law defining the context that allows everything demanded by the concrete situation would be exactly the opposite of a concrete definition of authority and its legal limitations. So in other words, he's saying that a law that allows everything to be determined by the concrete situation is exactly different. It's opposite of what a concrete definition of authority and legal limitations would have. The dictatorship cannot be a regular office, and it cannot be a minimum munmus perpetual office, perpetual office, right? Either permanent office, perpetual office, permanent office, either. If the dictator is granted the okay, let's go to French. Perpetual line, perpetual continue, just granted continual existence. So perpetual is, is allowed into forever, perpetuate itself. Then not only would the dictator be entitled to his office, he would also become the sovereign and would no longer be a dictator. For Bodin does not recognize sovereign dictatorship as such. So therefore, he becomes no longer. In other words, he doesn't. Bodin himself has no concept of recognize of sovereign dictatorship. Rather, what happens is that it becomes the sovereign. He is the sovereign in that situation, if it's permanent. Even when a new organization of state is being founded, he always assumes that the function of the sovereign is already formed. Right? This is Bodin. He points out that all states in the origin of their development are employing not just regular offices but also commissars, and that every reorganization of the state, every reformation, every reformation, okay, Latin, reformation, has to return to the extraordinary mandated persons, the Republica Constituta Causa, for the sake of forming the republic. I have to go to this. This is in French, but it's not French. It's Latin. So let's go to L again. I apologize, but I just want to get this for the purpose of establishing a republic. Right. This is that for the sake of forming a republic, establishment of the extraordinary manifestations for the purpose of do this. So again, repeat that line. That is that he points out that all states, in their origin of their development, are employing not just regular officials but also commissars, and that every organization of information has to return to the extraordinary mandated persons who are responsible for the forming of the republic, of the constitutional order, right, of the public thing. That's what Republica means, public thing. Remember that, res publica, public thing. It does this in order to convert the commissar in due course into a regular official. Okay, this is 370. This is Bodin's book, 378 9 and 392 3. Bodin does not distinguish even commissars of this kind who contribute to the reforming of the state from all the others. So even this kind of commissar who reforms the state, who remakes the state, he still considers it a type of commissar in that sense. His distinction between the two activities of state presupposes a clear contrast between law and command. This distinction had to be rendered obsolete by the further development of absolutism. This is because, according to Absolutist theory of the state, every state's expression of power is essentially and indiscriminately based on the will of the prince. As a result, an important insight of Bodin's was neglected. Despite the well-known success of his concept of sovereignty. Not even the brand of literature that was pitted against absolutism and against Bodin's understanding of commission refers to it. So all the literature who takes, in other words, all the literature that is arguing against absolutism and also against Bodin's command of commission, right? In the 17th century, when Algernon Sidney mentions dictatorship, he is not doing so in order to claim that his political enemy, absolutism, is a dictatorship. He refers to dictatorship for him because for him it had the traditional classical meaning. It was an institution characteristic of a free Roman republic. Algernon Sidney Discourses Concerning Government, third edition, 51. I do therefore grant that a power lies in the Diktatur, personally kept perpetually under the supreme authority of the people, may be virtuous and may discipline nations upon some occasions, and well-disciplined nations upon some occasions be prudently granted to a virtuous man. The dictator has nothing to do with the monarch, whose power is in himself. The power is only created in extraordinary cases, and the people always retain its power. Sidney mentioned several times in the that the dictator is only appointed occasionally, although in the line of his with his sources he calls Caesar a perpetual dictator. He does not realize that especially dictatorship can mediate the transition from democracy to absolutism. He does not realize that dictatorship can mediate this moment of this. See pages 121 to 121 and 134 to 38 of the third edition of Discourse. Again, Liberty Fund, Tom West did a good edition of Discourses on Government. It's available to Liberty Fund. Please go get it. It is classic. Algernon Sidney's thing it is wonderful. The non-Lockean defense of liberty with it's a very interesting book in that sense. He talks about the commission of the dictator consisting in the ne quid dementor, less no injury. There's no injury, 404.1. But he says about England at that time, in contrast to the rule of Caesar, we have no dictatorial power over us, 238. By this he means a dominion independent from the will of the governed. These statements are representative of the classic tradition inherited by the English opposition to monarchy, which was perhaps most strongly advocated by Milton. Milton is the most important guy in this entity. When it comes to Locke, he may be like no one else, takes the exclusive significance of the law and the indifference towards the sheer force of the basis of his deductions. And thus, the concept of the dictatorship seems to have no place in a system where everything is founded on a simple either or, right or wrong, law or despotism, public consensus or force. The power of fact is meaningless to Locke. What is sheer power or a mere fact has nothing to do with law. What is not amenable to law, not as an actual force, is a beastly principle, the way of beasts. Here in this sphere, not even the king can change anything through dictates or commission. So therefore everything becomes law in this weird way, right? In this context, Locke makes a statement that is still recognized in English law and can be explained historically by appealing to the notion of a struggle against the commissar as an instrument of absolutism. No action of a subordinate can be redeemed through the commission of the king. Only a law based on the consensus of the people can justify it. Not the commission, then, but the law guaranteeing state authority. The law gives authority. Now, this is directly civil treatise, second book, right? The second treatise of that chapter 17 on tyranny. That's why it's part 2, but I think treatise of government, book 17. There's no book 2 in that. That's a weird edition. Maybe there is a division of book 1, book 2, but chapter 17. Most abusive Locke's have chapters 1 through 9. What was it? Most versions of Locke's, like a treatise, simply has, 1 through 19, right? So this is the dissolution of government in that sense, this line here. When Locke wrote this, at the end of the 17th century, English absolutism was already dead, and the question of royal commission, which had become obsolete as the result of the Bill of Rights. 64. The last case of a commission that violated parliamentary principle was that of the Commission of Visitation of Magdalen College, Oxford, which was ordered by James II. Right, this is the last time it was done. This commission, of that sense, right? Nevertheless, the concept of commission reappears in another passage of Locke, and this fact shows that his seemingly plausible system was not that simple. He acknowledged a royal prerogative that should consist in the recognition of a public interest without a rule. Right? This is Civil Government, paragraph 166. The lawmaker, he says, cannot foresee everything. This statement is shared with the old doctrine of acquiesce or Ethiopia a key. I think acquiesce is Latin, so let's go with this. Okay, fairness, right? Equity, so epikeia. That's the Greek. This is the old doctrine of this, and I think this is Latin is Greek. Yeah, it's Greek. Therefore, the one who is entitled by the actual power of the state to execute the law should, according to the general axioms of natural law, have the right, although initially he only has the power, to make use of his power in unpredicted cases, until the legislative assembly convenes as normal. In other words, this is prerogative power, right? This is that famous discussion of prerogative, which is, is that's chapter 14 of Locke's things. So therefore, until the legislative is not done yet, law can't be made. Therefore, this executive prerogative power has to do to convene it, right? The lawmaker himself should make provisions for the possibility that he may not be able to foresee everything. Paragraph 159. Locke does not seem to see a problem of this of a particular political relevance here. In spite of this, he continues to discuss the relevance of the concrete situation, right? So therefore, this is like, okay, but what's going on here? This is the okay. This shouldn't happen. Everything should be law, but the situation where prerogative emerges, right? This is that, and this is why something is, the simple division of stately function into law and execution, as it corresponds to the monarchist opposition between the people, in the words of estates and kings, is supplemented in Locke by a third power, federative power, right? So therefore, that is that, federative power is that foreign, so this is that the estates, the power of this prerogative is domestic, and federative power is external, right? The executive, which can be summed up in a simpler formula of law, plus the execution of a law, only concerns domestic issues. The federative power, by contrast, refers to what has to be done against foreigners, war and peace, international treaties, and the like. In this case, however, a guidance by previous and general laws, by antecedent standings of positive law, is less possible according to Locke. So this is the problem. Federative law. This is why the unitary executive. This is why the Americans, if they relied on law, this is why there's a problem in this. People, in other words, everything depends on the different interests. Everything depends on the different interests and the plans of the foe. Consequently, everything must be entrusted to the prudence of a few people, so that they may be able to act upon the common good. Therefore, the word commentaire, to entrust, reappears more reappears here more than here once more in its characteristic meaning. So the comment the commit there to entrust has this meaning. 65 Locke's second treatise, second volume. This is page one of this edition that he's talking about, the London 1869 edition. Um, but what is to be done is against foreigners. This is federative power. Federative power is chapter. It's in prerogative. I think it's in prerogative power. Federative power. Oh yeah, federative power. It is in chapter 12 of the legislature, executive, and federative power in the Commonwealth. Right. Um, and again, that leads us to. That's why it's way before, in the subordinate of in other words, the subordinate of powers on the 8. So it is the earlier point that it's mentioned prerogative, this federative power. And then prerogative again is dealt more detailed, right? So what is done? Repeat. Well, but what is done? What is to be done in reference to foreigners depends much upon their action and the variations of designs and interest. It must be left in the great part to the prudence of those who have this power committed to them, to be managed by the best of their skills for the advantage of the commonwealth. Right? This is quoting of Locke in this right line. The mandate to do in the appropriate manner what the concrete situation requires, combined with the corresponding authorization to repeat the authority of the state, is nevertheless characteristic of the substances of the commission. So the commissary. This is what Locke. He points out. Locke is the rejection of this Bodinian model, right? But then what happens is that, well, but what about foreign affairs? Well, first of all, the problem of prerogative and the federative power. So prerogative, oh man, there's going to be certain. The legislature can't always be, and it can't foresee it, and the legislature may not be in power, so the executive might have to carry something out. But the legislative should figure out things in case, should make rules in case of that. That's prerogative, and that's not the question. The problem prerogative about domestic issues, but then the whole thing about prerogative about foreign affairs, federative, what it was called federative. And this is why Locke returns. Even Locke, who seems to reject it, reject this, like coming. In other words, Locke, which appears at one sense to be in agreement with the monarchamists, this Republican tradition, particularly with Milton's thing, but in rejecting both Machiavellianism and Bodin, but he's still nevertheless this is still there in that sense. This problem cannot go. We're done. Well, then we'll stop here. We're done here. The next time we meet on this, we'll look at the Royal Commissioners, book 2. We'll stop here. This ends part. This ends part. The second part of 1B, which is the second thing which focuses on Bodin. Part 2 was where we continued that for that previous part. If you have any comments, questions, please put them below. If you have any kind of questions or issues or things you want clarification of or more details, please put them below, and I'll respond to them when I see them. If you like the video, hit like, share it with friends, share it on social media, spread the word. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It helps grow the channel. It grows the channel some. We'll get more attention, and that's something that will be useful. Even if they don't subscribe, people interested in these things, or maybe other things that I've described in my previous videos on different subjects of the history of political thought, that people that might be interested in this and want to direct them towards it. Help direct them to the channel or direct them to the videos. Please share it. This is the most effective means that you can do. Another thing is, if you didn't like it, you can always hit the dislike button, the no button. But say why. what is criticism? What is the issue? And maybe I can learn, others can learn. Maybe you're right and I'm wrong. And if you tell people that, then they can learn from you in that sense. So this is what why. If you're going to put the negative, say why. Another thing is, you want to follow me on social media. The links are below. You can also follow my scholarship, the academic social media links, which directs to my scholarship and my research and things I do like that, below. Another thing you can do is if you want to help me to do what I want to contribute, help me do what I do do what I do, you do, Yes, you get it free by me doing YouTube, but if you become a subscribe star, a Patreon member, you can help me do it a little bit. Give me something, give me some spending money, coffee, tea, once in a while, makes life a little easier. Because no one does it, I understand why, because it's free and there's this is maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm too late in the circle. If I did this like 20, 15 years ago, and if YouTube came out and started this ahead of the game, I was just too lazy. I didn't. I missed this. My friend Laurie Johnson, my colleague from Northern, Laurie Johnson, went before me, and she was much better organized videos. I don't have the talent. I think her son kind of helped her out. I have no children who are tech wise, and even though I was kind of tech wise, my video, I have a web page from Tripod from the '90s. I was very much I knew to, but I haven't touched it since early 2004, 2002, 2001, 2002. I've kind of not, from the '90s that the 10, and when I came over here, I had less access to it. And then once I got a full-time job, I kind of just didn't look on it. And sometimes some of the pages went to freeze. I got slaughtered one time by someone found one of my old web pages. It never dies. Right? I didn't kill it. I don't even have control. Back in the bad old days, some of the web pages were different websites with different emails. Now some of these emails declined. I lost the passwords for them. I don't even know what the email that the certain websites exist to certain emails that don't exist anymore. That therefore the page is still alive online. It's like, oof, why didn't they get? Some things were killed off, but many weren't. And I forgot the password to some of these things, and the email that they were associated was long gone. So some things are there forever, and some things are kind of. Well, I was always a little radical. I always put my foot in my mouth my whole life. Hence, I never hid in the closet ever politically. And therefore, this is why I would never get a job in America. Hence why I'm academic exile, right? So that explains why I do it. You can buy my books below. The links are below there. So if, I'm glad that there are people out there, but there's not many. What I'm doing here, I'm doing this is because I like what Laurie Johnson does. And I think even Milliman is doing a good job, but Milliman, he's younger, is like this. I understand why he's doing it. I'm not no complaints what he's doing, but he's also doing a business, and I'm a teacher. This is my sense of public duty. Now, of course, it'd be nice. This is my service in that sense. Therefore, it'd be nice if someone gave me something to help me, reward me, but I'm not doing this for the reward. I'm doing this for this thing. It'd be nice that someone say, "Oh, you did great for this," but it's not going to happen. I realize that. But then, some people say, my wife and people say, "If you're not getting rewarded, why are you doing it?" I said, "Because this is an aspect of service." I think this is useful. This is my attempt to kind of say something that maybe someone will read it and listen to it and get something benefit from it. Okay, this is the diatribe. I shouldn't be talking about this. I should be wrapping the video up. It's already a long one, so it's an hour and a half already. If you have, like I said, if you want to help me buy a book, you can buy my book on it. This is again Tuesdays, Thursdays. We have many more sections to go thing here. We start next time on 2A, which will be on the ecclesiastical commissioners. Again, we're still doing on Mondays, Wednesdays. By you seeing this, you'll be starting seeing the end of book 3. And we're in the last 4 videos or so coming on book 4. Um, and that's it. And then on Fridays, our usual videos that deal with either it's a live stream, monthly live stream, or a messing around, either live stream or recorded, or a book club. I should do another book club. I don't know what to do. I'm kind of like, people say, why don't you do another book club? Yeah, but I do book review, short talks about review books, but not the book things. Someone says you've been picking on academic agent too much. Well, no, I'm not. Is it people ask me to do that, and I since I reviewed his other work, and I really can't review it anymore because the journal I used to review thing they don't send books, and I don't feel like, since they're not going to get counted, the places that normally do it doesn't get counted anymore for my purpose of academics. It's like, I still like doing reviews, but that's it. So that's it. Therefore, that's it. I should shut up. I should finish up the video. Long, let you go. Take care. Have a good day. See you later. See you next time. Bye bye.